Welcome, everyone, to the Forward Miami Show. I'm your host, Damian Pardo. And for those of you who don't know, Forward Miami, and that's the number 4, WARD, Miami is a local nonprofit that works on diversity and inclusion here in Miami-Dade County. I'm thrilled to have with me today as my very special guest, my friend Jorge Mursuli, who was in charge of Save Dade when the Human Rights Ordinance passed. This is Pride Month. So this is a great time for us to look at those historic events that really brought us forward here to this day. And in commemoration of Pride Month, I have my Pride colors in my jacket. And I wanted to talk with my friend Jorge and talk a little bit about everything, a little bit about your background. Why don't we start there?
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to see you. My background, I come from an organizational development background, and one day I was sitting on the couch reading the paper about this anti-gay thing that was happening in 1993, and I called the number and because I wanted to do something to get involved, and this guy named Damian Pardo answered the phone, and then I got snagged in, was licking envelopes and doing all sorts of things, and next thing you know, I was chairing the organization, and so the truth is that part of the reason I got in that position was because of you. So it's a nice 360.
No, absolutely, but beyond that, you really had. I mean, I think the universe works in amazing ways, and the universe put you with some very special skills. I think because the success of that time frame was really being able to build a broad coalition. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about those times and what made you succeed.
I always say that one of the things that made me succeed was curiosity. And what I mean by that is I really didn't know anything. I mean, I was not a politician. I didn't have a little black book. I didn't come from a wealthy family, from a political family. But I had a sense of self-respect that my parents had instilled in me. And I wasn't about to sit around and watch people talk about me and the people that I knew and my friends in a disparaging way. And so that's kind of what sort of prompted me to get involved. But I think part of besides the fact that we had so many talented people, I think first is my ability to recruit people. I think I've always had that in all kind of fields. So I've been able to really I always say that you're only as smart as the people at the table.
Sure.
So I'd like to surround myself with people that know more about things than I do in certain areas. And I think we managed to do that, and that was important. Curiosity, like I said, and curiosity really is, I think when you are a victim of discrimination, particularly, I mean, it's hard to sort of maybe imagine for some people now, but in the 80s and 90s, people were dying of AIDS, and it was just a different world. And I had to really be curious about why people felt the way they felt about our community. So it allowed me.
And just to remind people, there were no protections. So somebody could come to you and tell you, gay person, leave, you're fired because you're gay. We just don't want you here.
Yeah, and that actually did happen to many people, including me. Yeah. But I think that we outreach to the religious community. We outreached. This is something you and I used to have a conversation about all the time. That was not necessarily the way parts of the gay community wanted to move forward, right? It was a controversial issue, really, to some extent internally, about how we approached it. But we ultimately did exactly that, and went and reached out to the religious community and the African American community, and and making sure to deal. I mean, I remember you really were the sort of, I think, to me, my mentor, if you will, as it related to women and men. It used to be where women were completely separate in the gay community from men. There was a lesbian community, there was a gay community, and the two shall never meet.
Right.
And you were really the first person that said that's stupid. I mean, you didn't say stupid, but
right.
It just, and I think that it triggered a whole series of things that
and I think, by the way, the same is true with black, brown, trans, all the rest. It's kind of like once you get that, you think, wow,
right.
Why not? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, I remember that I didn't know anything about trans. We'd say trans back then.
Yeah,
We didn't
it
we
didn't.
didn't know the difference between. I didn't know, I should say. I didn't know the difference between a drag queen or a transsexual, which is what we used to call folks back then, and whatever. And so I didn't know, and I was so concerned that I was going to be asked about it. And so I started to go to drag shows. This is a true story. I started to go to drag shows by myself, like during the middle of the week, it just to try to, and that's where I met Adora, Roberto da Torre, and he really opened, my eyes and to that whole community, and I've ever since, have been I've never had an issue with those kinds of divisions, and I think the more that I think that's one of the gifts that this work gave me, right? Is it put me in a lot of different scenarios with a lot of different people, and it morphed who I was as an adult, and I'm grateful for it.
And you mentioned intellectual curiosity. You think that's part of the being able to build bridges, wanting
For
to
me, it
learn
was
people?
because here's what happens when you're curious. If I'm curious about the way you feel, even though what's coming out of your mouth can be very offensive. Right. It's the only way that I'm actually going to listen. Mm-hmm. If I'm curious, I'm like, okay, I got to understand what this guy is like. Really? Like,
where they're coming from.
What's going on here, And I think that when you do that, you're not defensive. And so you're a better listener. And then you're able to extract certain... I remember having a conversation with a big newspaper editor in town, and who said, oh, I don't discriminate, and et cetera, but there was always a but at the end of that. But, when I walk down Lincoln Road with my kids, I don't really like to, I don't like to see, men kissing or whatever it was that he saw. And I said to him, I get it. I have, at the time, my niece was like, I don't know, 8, 10, whatever she was. And I said, I get it. When I walk by and I see a straight couple making out in the corner and my niece is 8 years old, I don't necessarily want to have her see that either. But you know what? That's not what this ordinance is about.
Right.
This ordinance is about protecting people against, from discrimination in the workforce and banking and housing. So we're in agreement there. Yeah. You got it, and be able to just sort of move on and get them to focus on the real issue, not their fears, not what they think it is, not what they heard on the radio that somebody said, but what exactly was it that they were doing and how were they doing it? So,
do you think we've kind of lost some of that today? Meaning, like, don't you think that would be helpful, like with Trump and
absolutely,
and the Biden and all this?
I even worry because sometimes I feel like I've lost some of it, because it's just so crazy the last 4 years and the things that we've had to hear and put up with, that you almost want to run to that corner to be able to pick up whatever liberal tool there is to knock them over the head with it. But no, I think I know that's what made us successful. I remember Jerome Baker, who was the one that was managing our PR and our marketing and all of our materials. He always said two things. He said, we have to create all our visuals as if we're a large organization that's central in the community. So we created a red, white, and blue. It was safeguarding American values for everyone, and the logo still exists today. But that was really it wasn't just Jerome, it was all of us, but Jerome really put it down on paper. And he always used to say, too, when you talk to the press, you always have to be truthful. And those are the two things I learned from Jerome, that you always, you market yourself to be what you aspire to be. And, we were like a rinky-dink little thing that nobody...
They've often been called the MacGyver of politics.
I mean, you and I making copies at 1 a.m. at somebody's office or whatever. So, yeah. So I think those are the two things. My ability to bring on good people and be able to sort of give them the space to do their thing and to give them their light and their... I think I did that fairly well in most cases. And also the curiosity issue.
And what about the times? You've said a few times that it was very, the community was very divided, and it was like the LGBTQ community was its own worst enemy at some points.
Well, Yeah, listen, we were going through the AIDS epidemic. We've been through a decade of being ignored, and I think that when you're any community, whether it's a Black community or Hispanic community or a gay community that is victimized with, in a severe way, and feels like they don't have a pathway out of that universe of victimization, start to fight amongst each other, right? Because you're looking for the right leadership. You're looking for who's going to get them out of that sort of.
You want the perfect answer, and there is no perfect answer.
There isn't,
right?
And there isn't, and,
especially after Anita Bryant. Those years.
And years later, when we were successful, and people would say, "Oh my God, how how did you do it?" And the sort of the gay model was being sort of, I was like, "Oh my God, what the gay model is just getting up every morning and doing the best you can and crossing your fingers and working hard and being honest." And really trying to have people understand you, and I think that's what curiosity prevented me from being angry at people's behavior towards the gay community. It allowed me to spend my energy thinking about other things other than how offensive they were. And at the time in '93 when I called you, I'd been in a relationship for like almost 5 years, and by that point, I had something to protect. I had something that needed to be respected. It was no longer just I wasn't some single guy that which doesn't really matter. But for me, that's what made the difference.
Sure. And when you think about the word Pride and Pride Month, and you think about that trajectory,
that's interesting, because I think I'm more prideful now than I've ever been. Yeah. I think during the early years, I was so busy trying to create change that pride was a concept within the gay community. And I, based on the things that I was doing, spent the majority of my time outside the gay community. Right. It was a situation. I had to raise money. I had to speak to communities outside the gay community. And so subsequently, for years, that's where I spent the majority of my time. And the concept of sort of putting a pride together, which is so important, wasn't really at the forefront.
Why do you think that's important?
That's a really good question. I think, the obvious is people, want to see and the representation, but I think it's more than that. I think that it's an issue of self-respect. You are the most productive individual in the world, in anybody's life, anybody is, when you have a certain degree of self-esteem. You can't function at your very best without it. Pride is, I think, a mechanism. Some people can do that on their own. Some people, can't. Some people love the group sort of energy. And I think that whatever it is you need to do to get yourself to a place where you are your very best self, and that you have, then however you express that is your business. I'm not the expression police. That I have my way of expressing myself, and we used to have that problem, right, where like people that would express themselves one way would fight with people that express themselves another way, and I think that's becoming more understood, right? That who we are is the same. The way we express ourselves may not be the same. So we had a lot of difficulties. In terms of, people used to say, like, I remember, this is the right topic, but when people would be, arrested for having sex in places they shouldn't be having them, right. And people, would come to me and say, you got to do something about it because these cops are, sort of setting us up and whatever. I'm like, listen, I get it. I'm so sorry that happened, but having sex in a public space isn't your constitutional right. And, right. So you also had to stop people from moshing the message.
Yeah.
And that was very difficult. And that quite oftentimes alienated me and us from other gay people. Mm-hmm. Right. In the early years. And, there was a lot of accusations that we were whitewashing the community, and that right. we were wanting to be straight, or that I just had a job to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it wasn't, I had a job to do, and my job was, mean, I spent 2 years walking around the halls of the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
That was not easy. You know, I felt like I had a big old neon sign in my head that said, you know, fag. Or
The gay.
The gay.
The gay.
But I stuck it out for 2 years. And they did the right thing ultimately. And I'm grateful for them. And they were wonderful. And they ultimately were very helpful. But it took an investment. And not just me, people within the chamber as well, our allies. But our allies wouldn't have been able to do it if we didn't do it.
No, exactly.
Right? The sacrifice had to be initiated from our community.
I think also a lot of times people don't realize how hard it is for folks to come out. You know, we were just talking with somebody who said, oh, you know, the person came out to me and I was like, okay, get back to work. Well, you know, they don't, to them, it's obviously not a big deal at all.
Right.
But to that individual in our own minds, coming out is so enormous and huge that after we go through it, and by the way, you know, you come out once, right? Like to your inner family, and then you come out to your friends, and then you come out to your, and you spend your whole life coming out, you know, it gets easier, obviously. But I think when you look back, or at least when I look back, I am proud, you know, that I was able to do that, to consistently come out, consistently, like you said, self-respect, present myself. And sometimes to other friends, I compare it to achievements they have in their life. Like for some people, it's raising a family or getting a degree, a very difficult task. When you look back on it, or coming from Cuba, let's say, and making it here, you know, you look back and it was something really hard. It was really difficult, but you're proud because you got through it. Yeah. So I think, especially after on the heels of AIDS and all these other things, it's a good reflection to have during Pride Month. You know,
I'm perplexed recently, understanding that there's still kids that have a problem coming out, and when I say that, not to minimize their anguish. Obviously, listen, nobody had more anguish than I did, but you would think, right, that at this day and age. But I have a family friend who has 3 grown kids. Their middle child just graduated college. I mean, I think the entire family is pretty aware of his orientation, but he's just chosen not to share it. And so you wonder if that's another aspect, right? Like, you know, I mean, he certainly has been supported in every which way. There's no way in the world that he would think that his parents would be anything but like supportive. But yet those things still happen, and they apparently happen more than I'm aware of. I mean, I don't have children, so I don't know, but I keep hearing about, you know, the different things. So you wonder, you know, like, you know, what's everybody has their own sort of process by which they sort of, you know, open themselves up. It doesn't even have to be about orientation, right?
Right. That's why I think Pride belongs to everyone.
Yeah, it could be about, I don't know, anything, you know.
Self-acceptance. I mean, bottom line is about loving yourself, accepting yourself.
But I find myself enjoying Pride more. Yeah. I don't know, because I have the luxury. I don't know. I just feel like you know, as somebody who's been accused of being like, you know, whitewashing the gay community and not, you know, being too sort of colorful of a person, I love all the color. You know what I mean? I was watching the new video of Todrick's music video, that singer or whatever, Todrick Hall. And I mean, it's gay. And you know, and I was like, you know, good for them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, good for them and good for us and good for everybody. And how wonderful is it that somebody can express themselves and that not be interpreted as some sort of aggressive attack, which we're starting to see. Yeah. I mean, social media tells you that people who are uncomfortable with the progress we've made as an LGBTQ community are now, because I believe, in my personal opinion, because Trump has given them the license, the play card, if you will, to just come out and just say, you know, stop people that are waving their, you know, pride flags, or really like a flag is, you know. It doesn't mean nobody ran down the street after murdering 6 people with a pride flag. Right. You know, we didn't. It's not like flags that represent moments in history that were, horrific.
Right.
This is a flag of people that are just wanting to exist and coexist. And it's interesting how you can still see, because now it's so open, you're starting to see this kind of underbelly of discrimination.
Like a backlash.
Yeah, it's a backlash. I think it's always been there, but they always felt comfortable that their world, if they offered they didn't spit on us or kick us, there was like, that's good and we shouldn't do that, was their opinion. But now we don't need anybody but ourselves. We have our own entity. We have our political space. We have our social space, and we are impacting culture. And now those people are like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You mean you're changing the world that I live in? Okay, that's not cool. And so you're seeing this discomfort in a big way. And I don't think it's just about LGBTQ issues. I think it's about how African Americans are wanting to see themselves represented, women, and all of those old archetypes are being questioned, and they're upset. They're mad. You can see it. It's like, wow, they're screaming. Like, what are they screaming about? Well, that's what they're screaming about, I think.
Yeah, that's in the current day.
In the current day, yeah.
What would you recommend, like, for people who see that or experience that?
I think you have a choice. We all have a choice always, right? And that is, you can choose to have a degree of empathy for other people or not, right? I personally feel like it's a better world when we have empathy for each other. And I think that having empathy doesn't mean that we have to accept people's misbehavior.
Right.
But if what we want to do, depends what degree of responsibility you want to take. If what you want to do is continue to create change, then I don't think we have a choice but to sort of continue to have a degree of empathy and figure out how it is that we continue to make people more comfortable, less offended, less triggered, less concerned with whether somebody that they don't know is having a relationship with somebody that they don't know that's never going to impact them, right?
Right. But I mean, we're kind of living a time where if you're not in agreement, in full agreement, you're canceled. So I think that space in the middle for that kind of empathy, because you can have empathy with someone, but you may not agree with them.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and you just kind of move your separate ways or down whatever path you're going down.
I mean, that's really how we've.
It's getting harder to do.
But the people are, I think, equating fully realizing yourself and expressing with a lack of empathy. In other words, if I express myself, it's like there's only this much space for expression. Right. And if I take up this space, that means you have less space.
Less space, right.
That doesn't make, it's just not the case. The truth of the matter is, I believe that I'm truly a better person for having known all of these different types of people doing this, working on this movement, that I would have never known African-American folks to the degree that I know them now. I would have never known, just the diversity that Miami has, and really tried to understand who they were, because I had to some degree. And then I found out that, oh my God, well, this is, once you get it, once you get the power of diversity as opposed to the tolerance of diversity, then it fuels you as a person and fulfills you and gives you energy to do more and to talk more, as opposed to, oh my God, now I have to accept this, or now I have to accept that. It's really all in your brain, because at the end of the day, unless it's an actual bat that's hitting you over the head and actually causing physical damage, there's no damage happening to you.
Right.
It's something that you're creating in your own head. So, but I do think that we as much as I want to cancel some people that are behaving poorly, because I'm human, I have that inclination. I try not to. I try to say I'm not as good at it today because I'm older and I have less patience. But because it makes me happier. I don't want to.
But I mean, like Miami-Dade is such an area with all these issues that are just seen differently. It's not that there's really a right or a wrong. I mean, whether it's, for example, Israel. There are a lot of Jews right now that feel like not supported, not stood up for in the community, not understood. Whether it's Cuba with what's happening in Havana, Movimiento San Isidro, there's a lot of Cubans that feel not supported, not understood. And then we can go through a list, Haitian, and we can just Miami-Dade. I love it personally. I love that we live in a place like that.
Oh yeah.
But
I don't think I could live anywhere else really.
Me neither. But then how do you help bridge those differences?
Well, I think it's just asking each other, and not why are you not curious?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, curiosity is what makes somebody want to be a biologist. It's what makes somebody want to be
I almost feel like people are more afraid today and less communicative on all of those things than they were 6-7 years ago.
Because of leadership. Yeah. What's happened with Donald Trump is that for the first time in my lifetime anyway, the leadership at the highest office in the United States and maybe in the world has demonstrated the most horrific behavior when it comes to acceptance of others, and it has given people license who feel like the world is changing too fast for them and they are losing their edge. And it's unfortunate, because what should be happening for those people is that there should be leaders that come out of that community that say, we need what we need. We need to catch up. You guys can't leave us in the but this is the way we would like for you to treat us. This is the things our community needs, to start to advocate for what that individual, whatever that profile is of an individual that feels like they're being left behind. What they need is good leaders. And when you put a bad leader in any situation, listen, if we'd had a bad leader, and we've had them in the LGBTQ community.
But I mean, even taking it outside of Trump, even taking it outside of Trump.
Leadership is important. It just is.
But as an example, let's just look at like the progressive circle. Even within that space, there's a lot of people that no longer feel like they can openly. They're afraid to speak about race or to speak about background or to speak, like, certain issues have become kind of just.
It's about leadership. I think if you have a leader in that crowd that
the leader has to make that space, has to open it so that they can have
to. Without leadership.
How would you encourage someone doing that? I always say, if you're giving a presentation on diversity and inclusion and the crowd is silent, then you really need to think about what the kind of work you're doing.
You haven't tugged at anything that's real. Somebody taught me a long time ago that when you're sort of speaking about any issue, that you want to speak about it in a way that if your opinion is over here and mine's over here, you want to talk about it in a way that there's something that cross sections. What is it that we do have in common about that? And be able to talk about it in terms, like when I was doing immigration work, for example, I learned when people would say, well, people are talking English and they're talking Spanish and I don't know, this is my country and and I would be like, I totally get that it must be weird to be walking down the street in your own country and not understanding what people are saying. I get that. But here's the answer. The answer is not to try to find these people and kick them out. The answer is to assimilate them, to give them opportunities to become better contributors to what it's like to be an American. And it's the same.
I also
don't acknowledge that they feel that way. It's what they feel. People's feelings is not a democracy, really. They feel what they feel. So the question is to try to find something so that's my answer.
Yeah. I also don't think they really understand that those folks are really trying to learn. Like, they know that they're not going to get a better job unless they learn English. They know that life is harder.
But they're not going to hear you until you say, I get it. That must suck. It would be weird for me too. Right? If I was in my close area and I couldn't understand
exactly. Or they come up to me speaking a foreign language.
My dad embarrassed me as a kid many times trying to speak English, because everybody else was, English speaking. And my dad had horrible English, and he would forbid anybody in the house to speak Spanish when there were other people in the room that didn't understand. So that's the way I grew up. So for me, that makes a lot of sense.
No, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. You today, looking at George 30 years ago, what advice would you give him?
Don't eat so much.
Other than that,
Don't take things so seriously. You know, getting things done is important, and accomplishing things is important. But it's not the entire picture. That's what I would say.
it's good advice. Good advice. And when you look forward in terms of the movement, LGBTQ, or just Miami-Dade, the community work, what are some things you'd like to see? What are some advice you would give other community activists working?
I'd like there to be some sort of recyclable way that people look at history and learn from it.
What do you mean by recyclable?
I mean, it's a way that people can access history's knowledge. I feel like, I think, maybe it's just because I'm older now. Like I'm just an old guy that's just some grumpy old guy that doesn't, thinks everybody's doing it wrong. I don't know. But I always feel like, don't people learn? Like we've already been through this lesson. Yeah. People just repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I just, as they say, that's the definition of insanity. And so I think that's what if there was a way to make people more aware of, just not preach to them, but just somehow, I don't know the answer, but
help them advance, without having to go through the same stumbling block.
Like we've already been, history shows us a lot of things. If you keep your eyes and ears open, you don't have to, very few things are invented.
Yeah.
They're just recycled.
I think in the LGBTQ space, at least I always thought, since it's not really generational, you don't have parents teaching it to children, that connection is not really there.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. And we don't necessarily.
Now they may.
Maybe, but those are very small, you have very small. And we don't really have.
We have to figure it out on our own.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
We also don't really have institutions doing that role either, kind of passing on that collective history as a group.
I see social media now sort of making an effort to elevate LGBTQ history, and I think that's helpful. I see that more and more. Kids just getting on social media and telling a story about so and so, whether it's Oscar Wilde or somebody less known or some. What did I hear yesterday was some General von something or other during the Revolutionary War, who was this German guy who's gay, who was kicked out of the German army, who Benjamin Franklin brought over to the United States to build the army, and everybody was fine with it. Washington, whatever, and he was openly gay. Who knew? I didn't know that.
Who knew?
So, we are everywhere.
And what do you think are the biggest threats for the LGBTQ community looking forward?
For sure, that's an easy one. It's complacency. Mm-hmm. I mean, what we see is that, change is like, it's a push and pull. If we stop pushing, it doesn't mean things stay here. We stop pushing, it just goes back. It's just it's human nature. We have to constantly be aware that we're only as good as the last action that we take. We're only as secure as the last piece of legislation that we pass. We're only as productive as the last opportunity that we create for ourselves. And that's just the way it is for everybody. It isn't just for gay people. And the fact that we've come so, I was gonna say we've come a long way, baby. Like really, there are things happening now in this world that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, right? And that is awesome. And I'm super proud of everyone and all their contributions for it. But if we stop thinking about it, it'll just be taken away.
You're absolutely right.
That's it. Really it's just another lesson of history.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. I want to leave it at that, actually, George. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for joining me during Pride Month.
You're welcome.
I hope everyone out there joins us for our show next week, the Forward Miami Show, Friday at 4 p.m. Thank you for watching.